What's going on, ladies and gents? As you guys know, I have been enjoying Anthem so much. I have over 110 hours in the game right now. I have all of my javelins at masterwork level. And guess what? One of my favorite things about Anthem is, despite the fact that I have all of my javelins at a masterwork level, I still have so much motivation to keep playing the game and keep progressing through the endgame experience that Anthem has to offer. This is the first looter shooter that I have ever played that when I'm actually geared up, I can actually, of course, keep on playing the game and having fun because, of course, I can always strive towards one thing: better gear. But there is one major problem in Anthem right now that is plaguing the game, and I'm extremely shook. Alright, and I'm extremely surprised that BioWare just hasn't really noticed this. So very recently, guys, inscriptions or perks, we're just gonna call them perks throughout the rest of the video because, you know, it's just a shorter word, but very recently the perk system in Anthem was all over the place. A lot of players were upset because they were getting pistol damage perks on an autocannon, for example, or they were getting assault rifle perks on a grenade launcher, right? But of course, BioWare fixed that problem, and guys, they fixed that problem in just 5 days, basically 2 days, because the last 3 days basically they were off because it was a weekend. Whatever, they fixed the problem very quickly. So the perk system in Anthem is now better. If you have a sniper rifle, you're going to get good perks for your sniper rifle. If you have, of course, a specific gear, you're going to get perks that, of course, are good for that specific gear. But the perk system in Anthem is extremely flawed, okay? And this one problem is just going to kill Anthem if BioWare doesn't do anything about it. It's just going to drive the player base away. Like I said, Anthem is one of the games, guys, that I'm at the end game right now and I keep on playing it because I want better gear. But that's the thing, there is no such thing as progression in Anthem once you, of course, have masterwork javelin, or of course once you basically have everything that you actually need for your character. Okay, so here's how progression works in Anthem. If you get your javelin to masterwork and you're basically just breezing through Grandmaster 1 difficulty, obviously you're going to do Grandmaster 2. However, the jump from Grandmaster 1 to Grandmaster 2 is very noticeable. You actually need good builds if you want to be viable in Grandmaster 2. Now, here's the thing though. You cannot get good builds in Grandmaster 2 because of the perk system. The perk system in Anthem at the moment, it's basically just designed to not give players the opportunity to maximize their builds. Keep in mind, Anthem is a game, guys, that it's meant, you know, you're supposed to maximize your experience when it comes down to your javelin, right? You're supposed to be doing as much damage as possible. You're supposed to be powerful. You're supposed to increase in power. So of course, the more you increase in power, the higher and higher the difficulties of the game that you can play. So for example, Grandmaster 2 and Grandmaster 3 difficulty. But the problem with the game right now is that some of these perks that you're getting for weapons and gears are basically next to useless. And quite honestly, I am extremely shocked that BioWare didn't notice this. Here is a masterwork that I got today after, of course, the recent changes to the inscription or perk system in Anthem. 3% extra damage? Are you serious? 3% extra damage for a masterwork item. See, if it was a white item, if it was a green item, 3% extra damage, that would make sense. But for a masterwork item, something that you get in the actual end game, something that is supposed to, of course, be giving you some sort of sense of progression when it comes down to, of course, reaching that next goal being Grandmaster 2. 3% extra damage. This is a serious problem in Anthem and it needs to be fixed as fast as possible, and I want to make this video to spread out some awareness. Look, guys, just think about it. You have your javelin at a masterwork level, alright? You have all the gear that you want, so of course you want to get better and better gear. That's of course what's going to be keeping you coming back to Anthem. But it's going to get to a point where you're just going to stop coming back to Anthem because you basically realize that all of the gear and all the weapons that you're getting have shit perks, which means that your build is never going to improve, which means that there isn't any progression that is going to help you in the game, any progression that you can strive for, so that of course you can actually have a decent time on the higher level difficulties. And this is a big problem, especially since Anthem is a game that is designed for you to tackle the higher difficulties like Grandmaster 2 and Grandmaster 3. So if you can't maximize your builds with the perks that you get from, of course, the gear that you actually grind, well, there's basically not gonna be any point of progressing. And when there isn't any point of progressing, guys, there's just not any enjoyment on the game. And some people might say, well, what about crafting masterworks? BioWare wants us to craft masterwork gear and weapons. And guys, that doesn't really work either. I mean, I crafted today about 6 Truth of Tarsus. All of those Truth of Tarsus had terrible inscriptions. In fact, my pre-patch Truth of Tarsus, which had 125% more damage, had better perks than all of the Truth of Tarsus that I crafted. And again, according to Ben, which is one of the lead people at BioWare, he said that new weapons and new gear are actually going to be better, but there really isn't much of a difference because the actual statistics of the perks are very terrible. Anthem is a game where you're striving to get better gear, better weapons, because of course you could have a weapon or a gear or a gadget for your javelin that is of course going to be doing a bit more damage, or it's going to be lowering the cooldown a little bit. And of course, I really like that about Anthem, but the current system basically makes that impossible. And the reason why it makes that impossible is because we Anthem players are getting shit perks for our weapons and our gear. How am I supposed to strive towards Grandmaster 3 if I can't even have gear that's somewhat viable in Grandmaster 2? Now, my friend Stratus has told me a couple of times, you know what, Salvajee, I don't want to play Anthem and from one day to the next just have God roll level gear and just have, of course, the best perks for my gear. I actually highly agree with him, right? I don't want to get the best gear, by just grinding the game out for a week. All that I am asking BioWare to do is to actually have a fair perk system when it comes down to the gear and the weapon and the components that we have in the game. I shouldn't have 10% more damage on a masterwork item. If I get a masterwork item at Grandmaster 1, it should be giving me at least 40% more damage to that specific gear, with of course a really good roll being 67% more damage, for example. If I get a masterwork at Grandmaster 2, that masterwork needs to be aiding my progress a little bit towards Grandmaster 3. So if I get a weapon, for example, that weapon should have at least 50% extra damage towards opponents, for example. If I get a masterwork or a legendary on Grandmaster 3, that weapon should be having at least 70% extra damage to opponents, right? And the reason for that is because as you go up through the difficulties in Anthem, the game gets harder. Bosses have more health, enemies have more health, and there is a huge problem that a lot of players are pointing out in Anthem right now on Grandmaster 3, that you basically run out of ammo because the ammo drop rate isn't good enough. That's how many bullets it takes to actually kill mobs at, of course, the higher levels of play. And as someone that has played Grandmaster 2 from time to time, I know for a fact that the perk system in Anthem needs improvement, because the way that it's looking right now, guys, it's basically looking as if you're not going to be able to progress unless you, of course, grind out the game for an entire month, and in that entire month that you grind out the game, you're only going to be getting about 2 pieces for your loadout that are actually going to be decent. The reality is that we live in 2019, and Anthem is not one of these MMO games that it should take you months or weeks just to get that one good item. Anthem is a looter shooter of the new age, and Anthem needs to get their shit together before, of course, they start losing their player base, because they wanted to see how much shit they could get away with when it comes down to this terrible perk system. And guys, I have faith in BioWare. I hope that they actually listen to the community when it comes down to this terrible problem that is plaguing the game, because quite honestly, at the moment, the game is honestly next to unplayable when it comes down to Grandmaster 2 and Grandmaster 3, because you can't maximize your builds towards those difficulties, and on top of all that, the drop rate in Grandmaster 2 and Grandmaster 3 is so bad that you absolutely cannot progress through, of course, the difficulty levels. It's so bad that actually BioWare already pointed out that yes, they are looking into how to, of course, make the Grandmaster 2 and Grandmaster 3 difficulties actually worth playing. And the reason for that is because players just rather play Grandmaster 1 because, of course, the rewards that you get from Grandmaster 2 and Grandmaster 3 just aren't really big enough to, of course, deal when it comes down to that difficulty spike. I love Anthem. I really do. I'm enjoying it. And as you guys know, I'm a variety content creator on my channel, but I really do think that Anthem has potential to become one of the main games that I cover. However, if this problem keeps plaguing the game for the next coming months, I really do think that Anthem is just going to be going downhill, and players are going to be moving towards games like The Division 2, for example, a game that is probably going to give players the ability to actually grind towards a specific build and of course see some sense of progression. Anthem, please get your shit together and fix your terrible inscription system. If not, you're going to lose your player base.